So you're all extremely welcome here to DCU this morning. My name is James O'Higgins-Norman. I'm Director of DCU Anti-Bullying Centre, and on behalf of the Centre and the University, I want to say you're all extremely welcome, and we're very happy that you could be with us for the launch of this very important report. DCU Anti-Bullying Centre undertakes research and develops educational resources for a wide range of issues related to relationships, online and offline, particularly conflictual and aggressive relationships, and of course bullying will be one of those. And so, a lot of the time people would be familiar with our work on schools programs and so on, but in fact we work across the 9 grounds that are contained in the equality legislation. So I'm really happy that we are now bringing a report out on ageism and workplace bullying, which has been supported by the IRC and of course by the university as well, and as part of the work of the centre. It's particularly, I think, important, especially in a world that's so obsessed often with youth and energy and a particular kind of way of seeing the world that kind of tends to value those particular qualities of youthfulness and energy, and often that causes us to overlook the qualities that are existing in the rest of the population that can, of course, make a massive difference to a sustainable society where we have all ages involved in every level of society. So on behalf of DCU Anti-Bullying Centre, you're all very welcome. We're really happy to have been able to support Trudy and her colleagues in developing this research and publishing this report today. But it's time now for me to hand over to somebody else. I mentioned youth and energy there a moment ago, and that, of course, the President of DCU comes to mind immediately. And I'm always very nervous introducing the President because I never know what he's going to say about me or the Centre. So I hope he'll be nice to us today, but as he always will be. So please welcome Professor Dara Keogh, the President of DCU.
Thank you very much, James, for that introduction. And I'll say nothing about you, but I like the kind of flattery at the beginning, and it's important when we're running the payroll this week. So, listen, it's lovely to be here, and I'm delighted to welcome everybody to our U building. This is the student centre of the university. It's a student hub, and it's always kind of full of energy. And I finished here. We got downstairs a coffee morning for the graduate students, so you'll see kind of coming through all the student activities. And it is very appropriate that the report would be launched here, because if nothing else, we pride ourselves on our diversity within the university, and we see the university as a place where everybody can flourish. And that's our purpose. It's about our people, the development of our people, and creating an atmosphere and the support for them to flourish. And that diversity piece is absolutely critical, that if we were all the same, it'd be a very kind of dull world. And you can see it, and I know we have to work at it always in terms of diversity, but you can see it even kind of walking around. There's a great kind of ethnic diversity. We're probably not where we need to be in terms of the kind of age range of students. One of the things I think has kind of militated against us is the kind of rates of kind of high kind of employment that previously in times of kind of downturns, when you had, say, large-scale redundancy packages, say in our area in terms of the airport or Aer Lingus, it was easier, I think, then to pick up mature students and to recruit mature students. But the opportunity cost for mature people to return to learning, I think, is quite significant now. And that's something that, as a university, we're very conscious of, and trying to increase our numbers of mature students and senior people in the university. And admittedly, we are a university, an age-friendly university, and we work away at that, but it is a constant challenge. And I say that just by way of introduction, and saying why congratulations to Trudy and her colleagues for hosting today's conference here, because I think that emphasises the commitment of the university to lifelong learning, and the university is a place of welcome for people right across the life cycle. There's good diversity kind of in the room here, diversity in terms of perspectives and interests, and that's super to bring everybody together. And I think that that's something that Trudy does kind of very well in terms of her collaboration and her style of working. It's good to see our colleagues here, James and our friends from the DCU Anti-Bullying Centre. And we have the report, and we look forward to today's kind of seminar where people can actually flesh it out and see what does it mean in real terms, and to bring the pages alive in terms of the discussion. I'd like to especially welcome our guest contributors, and I'm always conscious that I will leave people out because I know some people are here that weren't on my list. So Mary Harkin is with us from Age and Opportunity, Catherine O'Flynn and Conor Ford from William Fry, Neil Breheny from Sean Ormond and company, and I think Sean is with us himself, Sean Ormond, Sinead Gibney, who's the Chief Commissioner of the Irish Human Rights and Equality Commission. You're very welcome, Sinead. And Professor Helen Russell from the ERSI. I'd like especially at the outset just to thank the Irish Research Council for their support for this research. It's absolutely vital. And the Power of Ageing was one of 9 DCU projects that were funded under that call. So it's delighted to see the outcome, and now we're into the dissemination phase, and the impact will come later. And the New Foundations programme is particular in that it encourages kind of cross-community research. It's engaged research and collaboration between researchers and the NGOs. So I'm really pleased, because of the collaboration with Age and Opportunity, as I said at the beginning, that the report aligns with our values. And our purpose here is to transform lives and societies, and we do that through people. And again, the purpose is that people will flourish, and the Anti-Bullying Centre's vital work in reducing kind of bullying and impediments and the pressures and the abuse that prevent people from being themselves. And the impact of that is enormous. We've had discussion in the last few days, people reflecting on abuse and harassment in their school years and the way in which that has blighted their lives. But people forget, and I think why today's conference is important, about ageism and elder abuse, again, which is very significant in our society. And again, the report points out that while Ireland has currently one of the lowest percentages of older people in Europe, that our demographic is changing rapidly. And ageism can be seen sometimes as harmless, but of course it's not. It's kind of pernicious and it's poisonous. And even from a self-interested point of view, even from the point of view of self-interest, it's something that all of us should oppose, because if we're lucky, we will all get there. But as I say, not just the right thing to do, but from a selfish point of view, it's one that we need to work at. So it's clear that everybody in the room recognises the problem, and problems are easy to identify. Solutions are more challenging, and I'm delighted that this report is solutions focused and points to practical ways, as I say, that we can reduce this kind of pernicious kind of influence in society. So congratulations, I say, to everybody involved. The positive opportunities identified in the report have great possibilities and potential to create a healthier dynamic within our society. And as I say, we know that society will be richer as a result of it. So I'd like to thank, and again I'm conscious that I will leave somebody out, I'd like to thank Trudy, James, Alfredo, Tanya, Sarah, Adriana, and everybody who contributed to the report and also to hosting today's conference. So folks, I hope you have a lovely day here. I hope you kind of leave here kind of emboldened and empowered by the spirit of the report to tackle this evil that we know as ageism in our society. So thank you folks, and welcome.
Thanks very much, Dara. Just to follow on, I just want to say that we're delighted that you could join us today, and we know that we also have people joining us on our online link, so everybody's really very welcome today. As was already stated, the report very much came from the whole ethos of the Anti-Bullying Centre, and that was because it very much is around addressing the 9 grounds of discrimination and looking to provide a solution-oriented approach. And this is very actively followed in terms of policy, in terms of practice, in terms of research. So I just very much want to thank James here, the director of the centre, who actually, we talked together one day and we actually were looking at the gaps. And one of the gaps was around ageism, and we said that we would follow through with this. But as with all reports like this, and I know that certainly a huge part of our work comes from what we were looking at with the WHO report last year, and that's just to say how important ageism is as an ism, as a discrimination, that the World Health Organization looked at this as being something that really needs to be tackled. And there's actually the 2021 report, and I know that Sinead will probably be very much talking about that later in her conversation with us today. But what we did look at was that if we did need to address this, the WHO report actually states we need to do this as a group. There is none of us that can do this on our own, and that we need to actually work together as a team, whether that's in organisations or whether it's, for example, in workplaces, organisations like that, or in society. And so I'd like to say today that although we're talking about ageism, addressing ageism in the workplace, it is very much about addressing ageism in the wider society. That if we can be leaders in the workplace to show how we can rid workplaces of ageism, then we can actually do that well, I think, within society. And our team is really very much our partnership. Mary's here today from Age and Opportunity, and I also want to thank Kieran, who can't be with us today, but Kieran, a huge part of this work. Tanya, Alfredo, the postdoctoral researchers who are very much involved in the writing and the design of the report. And indeed, the ABC Centre. Again, just very much teamwork. If I could just tell you a little story, last week we had a little bit of a blip that we thought was going to become a major blip, and that was that our report wasn't in the format of the universal design template, and it was like, oh, what do we do? And Ger, who's at the back here, pulled out all the stops, took her day off work to actually work on making sure that this report is with us today. And that to me is teamwork. Adriana and Sarah, and indeed so many people involved with making this happen for today. But also our guest speakers. And I think what's really wonderful about our guest speakers here today is that we're actually talking across the themes that are very important. So around ageism and awareness of legislation to prevent ageism in the workplace, ageism and human rights. And I know that's a very big part, an integral part of our work. Ageing and the workplace, ageing and the workforce, and the research that's been done on that. And Helen is very much here today to tell us about that. And then Tanya and myself will very much talk about the actual report itself. But we don't want this just to be about a talk shop where we're talking here and up here at the podium. We want to bring this back to you. And for that reason, we just feel that it's really important that this is very interactive, very engaged, and we love and very much invite and welcome questions from you. And indeed, I think we have some exercises and some little elements to a warm-up exercise that Mary's just going to do with you in a moment, and that I know Catherine and Connor have just an exercise around using Mentimeter. So it's very much about all of us together. This is not about the definitive answer to providing a solution-oriented approach. It's very much about us having the conversation together and continuing, when we go out the room, continuing from here over the next few weeks. So again, I just want to say, Dara, I want to thank you very much for being here today, and James, and we will continue the conversation over the next while. Mary, I'm going to invite you to start us with your addressing ageism across the lifespan.
I have some slides and thanks. Okay, so I'll get started. It's great to be here. Thank you very much, Trudy, and it's been a lovely project to work on, and it's always up to DCU. I left DCU the first time in 1989, and I'd say it's that small. You can stand at the door of the library and see both that you want. There's about 3 buildings, and so I love every time I come back, and we come back every year. Pre-COVID, we came back every year, and we do our Go for Life games in the sports centre. So we're hoping maybe next year to get teams from every county in Ireland playing Go for Life, playing our games. And we always get a great welcome, and I particularly like to pay tribute to Louise and her team in the canteen, who are really brilliant. So I think, just to get going, I'm going to talk about ageism through the life course, just to kind of get the day going. And so what, if, as my yoga teacher says, if it's available to you today, there's a word under your seat, and if you can pick it up, and if not, maybe your neighbour will do that for you. And maybe tell you what is written on it, if that would be okay. So if I say the word young, if your word relates, if you associate your word with being young, could you just hold it up, please? And if I say the word middle-aged, you can hold the word up twice if you want. If I say the word middle-aged, you hold your word up. And if I say the word old, and I didn't pick this on purpose, it's the one that was under my desk, walking stick, you hold up your word. So, oh yeah, there you go, yeah. Okay, so these are the words we're holding up for old. So that's just by way of saying, words, we feel in age opportunity, words, here are our words. Words and images are really important in relation to ageism. They're the way that we make sense of the world. We start to translate the world through, at a very young age, through the words that through the language that is spoken to us, through the ideas that we get through language, and also through the images. So in terms of ageism, I'm going to just very quickly, Trudy mentioned the WHO report, so just very quickly, ageism kind of operates as stereotypes, how we think, prejudice, how we feel, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about those two elements, and then discrimination, which we'll be talking about later on, which might manifest itself in the workforce, and that's how we act towards other people based on what our brain does. Ageism can be interpersonal, how we treat other people. It can be institutional, again, how we treat people in the workplace, what the legislation allows us to do. And then also, very insidiously, it can be self-directed, and I'll just come back to that a little bit later on too. And you see our little graphic here at the bottom. It affects everybody. Ageism is not just about older people. Actually, it affects everybody at every stage of their life. And it starts very, very young. So this is Generation Alpha. These are the babies and the young children. In Ireland today, many of them will get to 100 and they'll receive the President's bounty in Bitcoin or whatever way we're using money at that point. But I could have done 20 minutes on images that children would be exposed to. But I just wanted to juxtapose these two images here. So we have, very public images of the children. So the image being reflected back to the children is of themselves as active, as running, as, and the image that has been reflected back to both children and older people are of frailty, dependence, despite the fact that actually more young children need help crossing the road than older people. And the only positive thing I can say about the image on the left there of the older people is that it's actually two full bodies. It's not a pair of fluffy slippers or a set of wrinkled hands, which we've had a lot of over the last couple of years, but just by way of kind of illustrating that from a very, very, very young age, we are bombarded with language and images that doesn't make us, doesn't reflect reality, and that gives us, unfounded and unfair ideas about what it is like to be an older person. So let's move on through the generations. So this is Gen Z. Gen Z are the teenagers, but I'm actually going to talk about Gen X, which is many of us in this room here, who were the Gen Z in 1987. So when I was in DCU, actually. So in 1987, there was a study done by the National Council for the Elderly, which is a term we wouldn't really use now. But graphic design has come on a good bit as well, as you can see. But that study found that there were predominantly negative images of older people. And also, the young people at that time, the school leavers, these were school leavers in 3 schools, they also felt that older people had a negative attitude about younger people. So just to say, it's working across the board here. Incredibly, 28% of us were prepared to specify an age at which people ceased to be of value. And 7%, and just maybe have a think about what age you are now, 7% named 60 or less as that. And I think that this is a really good illustration of how ageism is a prejudice against your future self. Because here we are now, looking at what our cohort said in 1987. So moving on then, I did want to repeat this study in 2020 with the same schools, and I'd done loads of work getting to the same schools with school leavers in those schools to see. I should have said Age and Opportunity was set up on foot of this, study to try and challenge ageism and to promote participation. So 30 years on, can we repeat the study in the same schools to see have we worked? Have we done what we're supposed to do? And then we had COVID. So we couldn't do it. Obviously, schools were shut. So practically speaking, we couldn't do it. And now we're at a position where COVID is hopefully away. But our sample, how tainted will our sample be after all of the latent ageism that, let's say, came out of the attic during COVID and the way that older people were treated? And that's a subject for 25 more conferences here in DCU, I'm sure. So I'm not going to, but just to make the point that we weren't able to repeat that survey. So, okay, let's move on through the generations, on to Generation Y. These are the millennials. There's another little challenge for your subconscious there. What did your subconscious do when we said millennials? Did it think of a positive image? Did it think of a negative image? Did it take some of those stereotypes? This was a study done by the Gulbenkian Foundation and the Royal Society of Public Health in the UK. And it found that, again, quarter of Generation Y normal to be unhappy and depressed, older people being never thought as attractive, and older people are selfish. They vote selfishly. So these are some of the kind of, I think we can say this is the belief system that these young people have at the moment. So again, moving on to Generation X. So lots of us in this room are of Generation X, okay? And again, I could have lots and lots of different examples about the messages that we are being given. So this is the paper of record, let's say, in Ireland in 2019, talking about the demographic time bomb and how we're going to pay for it. And incredibly, I couldn't believe this when I saw it, incredibly, it's a worst case scenario if more of us get old. I don't know if you can see that there, but the lower numbers are a best case scenario, and this is in the Irish Times in 2019, and it's then compounded by the presentation of the thing I really hate the most, which is the older dependency ratio, the old age dependency ratio, which is so unfair. It kind of says dependency is bad, which it isn't. It says older people are the only people who are, pulling resources out of society, and it's just so unfair, and it kind of is an example of stoking intergenerational conflict instead of focusing on policy and the kind of decisions that have or have not been made by the government. So we could lots of different examples. Housing, should older people move out of their big houses because we've messed up the housing situation in Ireland? So focusing on one generation as the locus of the problems that we've made through our poor policy. So again, conscious of time. Another little challenge for your subconscious there. So boomers and the silent generation. So the older people who are retired. Again, I could have taken lots of different approaches to this, but these are birthday cards, Any newsagent will have a selection of birthday cards, And just to really make a point that they're very pervasive, They're very pervasive. I don't know, some of us may have bought them, may have given them. They're supposed to be humorous, We're supposed to take them and laugh at ourselves, But I always kind of ask the question, would it be acceptable to give a toddler a card that said, "Happy birthday, Baldy," whether that toddler had hair or not? Would it be acceptable to give a teenager a card that said, "Happy birthday, Spotty," whether that teenager had spots or not? And this is really no more acceptable, no more funny, actually, than that. And it's really something that we really shouldn't tolerate. And what it does then, I spoke earlier about self-directed ageism. So this is, if you're constantly being given the message that this is what's ahead, or this is what's, this is how you order it, and these aren't even the worst of the cards, then you're going to internalise that. And then you're going to start to be less demanding about services like adult education or like health. You're going to feel that somehow you're less worthy. You're a person without rights, and I'm sure Sinead will mention that later on. You're a person without rights. You're less worthy of these services which maybe the rest of society needs, because you're constantly internalising an image that's making you believe that. So that's kind of a whistle-stop tour through the life course, through the generations, and I suppose just to leave it at, progress. We're making progress. This is the Centre for Ageing Better in the UK, which is a fabulous repository of resources if you're interested in this area. But just to say that, to finish by saying, whatever your generation is in this room and online maybe, that I wish for you, that you do get old, because not everybody does. It is a privilege to get old, and we should make the most of it if we get there. So really hope that, wish that for you, and that these are the kinds of images that you are seeing reflected back to you. But even more importantly, perhaps, that the people who may be making decisions about where you live, what you eat, and when you, go to bed, those kind of very, very big decisions that will make a huge difference to your quality of life at a time when maybe you can't make those decisions, that these are the images that those people are seeing as well. So that's it.
Thanks very much for that, Mary. We're going to have some questions and answers in a little while. Tanya and myself are going to just tell you a little bit about our report, just about the overall idea, and then we're going to have Catherine and Connor talk about their work with William Fry, and then we'll maybe take some question and answers before we go for a very welcome tea-coffee break. Okay. So, following up from what Mary was saying, that what we actually felt was that it was really important that we would look at ageism from the point of view of how it is designed as a social construct. And within the report, we looked at some of the quotations. For example, Palmore talks about this as a social disease, or it is manifested in the form of stereotypes, for example, at the cognitive level, and Mary talked about this, how we think, the prejudice at the emotional level, and how we feel, or direct discrimination, behavioural level, and how we act. And again, this is very much, we keep mentioning about that WHO report, but it is a very important report around making us aware of ageism. So at age 18, and again I think Mary mentioned that, we're really talking about ageism in the context of this isn't just about the negative perception of ageing that's very pertinent to older people, but how it impacts on younger people's lives. And I know that, for example, a quote that we had is that at 18 you're too old to become a world-class pianist or too young to coach a professional soccer team. And I work with students within the education system, and some of them tell us that when they go back to the school where they actually were a student, sometimes the teachers, for example, in the staff room, kind of don't actually engage with them because they still see them as that kind of younger student and think of them as being too young to kind of adopt their role as teacher. So again, it's very pervasive at all levels. And when we looked at the context and the consequences of ageing in the workplace, what we looked at was that the manager, for example, would actually be... sorry, Tanya, just go back to me with technology. The context, that the manager-employee relationship is one of the main obstacles towards an age-inclusive workplace. That leadership in this area is hugely important in terms of how age and ageing in the workplace is perceived. And that age discrimination laws are not always enforced in organisations. And we're delighted that we have Catherine and Connor and we have Neil and Sean to talk to us today about that from the legal perspective. And that age is still underrepresented in diversity policies in organisations. And Joanne and Lorna, we know we have you from the EDI unit here, that how much is age represented within, for example, diversity policies? Are we getting better at it? And that the consequences are that for older workers it does affect health, well-being and human rights. Again, huge issues that I think will be very much part of our conversation today. It hinders levels of vitality, production, job satisfaction and commitment. And I know, Tanya, we were talking about this, that actually the research shows that where people were required to, or felt that they had to leave the workplace, this does impact on their health as opposed to people that feel it's the right time to leave the workplace. And it increases risk of poverty and financial insecurity. We don't have to go much further than Ireland to know that owning your own home is in some ways a dream, and that there are many people in the workplace, actually even at 50, 60, 65 years of age, who are renting. And so this is a huge problem for them. And for organisations, it deteriorates the organisational environment. And for society, we believe that there's a higher economic cost. And indeed, this is actually what the World Health Report talks about. It's not that it's just an impact on us in terms of education, in terms of the workplace, but it's actually in terms of the economy and in terms of how it filters through our social structures and our cultural structures. So it's really a huge issue that we really do need to address. I'm going to hand over to Tanya, who was very much involved with the report, along with Alfredo. And can I say, Tanya came from Germany to be with us today, and Tanya will tell you a little bit about the study objectives.
Yeah, thank you very much, Trudy. It's really a pleasure to be here. I lived for 10 years in Ireland and had also done my PhD here, so it's really a great opportunity to be back, and it's also wonderful to see you all here. I'm delighted to talk about the report itself. It was a half-year project that we engaged in, and a lot of work went into it. We actually did a systematic literature review following the PRISMA guidelines, and we focused on 15 quartile one or high-ranked journals and sourced 108 articles. And we had predefined themes, so we looked at these 180 articles and thought, okay, what are the main themes that are actually emerging at the moment in the literature? Because we really focused only on the current decade, so from 2020 up to 1st July 2022, when we finished our data collection. And the predefined themes were basically, what is ageism in the workplace? What are the solutions? What are the opportunities for older people in the workplace? How can we guarantee a healthy and well ageism while being at work? Because we know all societies around the world are aging, and at the moment it is maybe something that we start considering to discuss, but I believe in the near future it is something that we have to consider and address. And yeah, if we look a little bit farther, we see here the overview of the themes. And what really stands out is that the literature currently addresses most the end of career opportunities and also the macro level policy, following as well the World Health Organization guidelines. Now, what might be also interesting for you to observe is that most studies that we included in this report were multinational studies. So they really did comparative studies looking at what countries do in different places and what are the differences and similarities. And of course, most countries where ageism is addressed in the workplace are currently those countries where we see already an aging society, such as America, Germany, the Netherlands, or even in England. Yeah, here's a little overview of the report, the body, so to say, that you see as well in the handout, the copy that some of you already have. Again, we can see clearly that the influence of policy is a major concern in the literature, currently mostly addressed. What's perhaps really interesting to say here is that it lacks at the moment really the caregiving aspect. So many people are working at the moment and at the same time are responsible to take care of their children or grandchildren, of relatives or spouses. And you can imagine if you're working and you at the same time have to care, it creates a kind of a juggling position and it can be very stressful. Policies and organizations are not addressing this currently. And I think that was one of the most interesting things that emerged. Also quite interesting was the work retirement transition. A lot of very interesting ideas can be found in the report. Maybe a little teaser for you to have a look at. Very interesting things is like phasing out towards retirement, maybe considering part-time retirement, considering subsidies for employers to keep older workers in the organization. And we have also the other aspects that I would like to address at a later point of the conference when I talk about the recommendation that emerged based on the findings. So thank you so much for your attention up until now, and please feel free to ask any questions. Thank you.
I was just wondering, in terms of questions, would it be a good idea if we take Catherine and Connor's input and then maybe have some questions after Mary's presentation, Tanya, myself, and Catherine and Connor? And that's before our tea coffee break. Thanks very much. And I just...
That's all right with you.
Here, yeah. Great. Hello, everybody. Great to be here. Thanks so much for inviting me, Trudy. It's our pleasure. And really excited to read the final report. I've had a look at the draft, and it's excellent. It's so helpful. So really well done. So I'm going to look at it kind of from a legal perspective, and I think that Trudy came across us because we did a couple of reports on the issue of age in the workplace. Sorry, I should backtrack a little bit. I'm the head of employment law in William Fry, so I would do a lot of work with discrimination type claims. I've always had a real interest in equality law. But back in about 2016, myself and one of my colleagues, Alicia, started to kind of get really interested in the area of age in the workplace, and the concept of ageism, because as sort of has been talked about this morning already, we kind of felt that ageism was in a way more acceptable than the other isms. You could joke about someone being really old, or you could joke about someone being really young without too much fear of or repercussions, whereas you absolutely wouldn't about sexism or the other isms. So we just thought that was really interesting, and plus we saw a real increase in the case law coming through in relation to recruitment, promotion and retirement ages, which is a really hot topic at the moment in the employment tribunals, and we'll touch on that as well. So we commissioned a report in 2016. We asked a number of questions of employers and employees and came up with some really interesting statistics. And then we did it again in 2019. So I'm going to go through some of the interesting reports from 2019. We're also going to do a little live report, just to keep it interactive and also kind of get a feel for how people feel in the room. I'll look at the legislation and the code of practice, and then we'll finish up talking about some practicalities, ways employers can think about removing the risk of ageism within the workplace. So just to touch on the 2016 before we move on to 2019 report, because I was having a flick through it the other night and I remembered that one of my favourite findings from the 2016 survey was we asked, because we couldn't really see, and I don't know, Tanya and Trudy, if you came across this, we couldn't really see any research that pointed to what is an older worker. So we asked that in the survey, and on average, people felt an older worker was 51. So that's not great. And it's kind of 51, would you believe? Yeah. Shocking. So it's kind of like, when you ask little kids, I remember asking like my 3-year-old, what age did she think I was? And she says like 18. You just haven't a clue. But I certainly wouldn't say 51 was an older worker. We didn't actually do it again in 2019. We should have. And I'm just thinking, I wish I'd put it in our Menti survey, but we'll do that again, Connor. We'll do that again. Also, the 2016 report, we asked about characteristics. And again, we've been kind of looking at that this morning, and very much
The answers that we received definitely just followed the societal stereotypes. So people said that younger workers were more likely to be willing to learn new skills, more innovative, more technologically capable, whereas older workers had better interpersonal skills, harder workers, more loyal and dependable, but resistant to change, allegedly. But of course, research would indicate that stereotypes are not correct, but it's good for us as employers and people living in society to, fight against that kind of stereotype. So looking at the 2019 report then, in a little bit of detail. So we surveyed 1,000 employers and employees, so we got a good kind of feeling for how people were feeling in the workplace. And at the time, there were 97,000 workers over the age of 65 in the workforce, and that's now 105,900. Obviously, we're going to have 4 different generations working in the workplace, so it was really good to get a feel for what employers can do to act and prepare for this more age-diverse workplace. So one of the first questions we asked those surveyed was, do you believe you will have to work over the age of 65? And 61% said that they will. So with the majority of employees believing that they will have to work longer than ever, Trudy and Tanya's report is so timely in terms of helping employers prepare for this and prepare for the different generations working alongside each other. And as a follow-up question, that's just a little breakdown then of those who said yes. It's kind of interesting. As a follow-up question, though, we also asked, let me see, does it come after this one? Where's the follow-up question about will you like to work? Sorry, I'm showing my technological. We definitely had a follow-up question about would you like to work in the workplace? Yes, thank you. Is that the one? Yeah. So this was a follow-up question. Mixed attitudes towards the subject of age here. As I said, 61% said they will have to, 32% said they would like to. Majority there, though, of people who said yes being over 55. So perhaps as you get older, you realise that you would actually like to continue working longer. We also asked about whether their current job has a retirement age. We're going to talk about the law around retirement ages in a moment, but generally the Employment Equality Act does prohibit discrimination in relation to age, but you can set a mandatory retirement age as long as it's objectively justifiable. So with no statutory retirement age in Ireland, this topic of mandatory retirement age is dealt through the contract of employment, whether that be explicit or implied. So it was interesting that only 48% said that they did have a retirement age in their contract. So the other 52%, if the employer was trying to retire them out, they may come into difficulties. And then some other statistics, 61% of respondents believe that older workers are inhibited by technological change. And this is an area which is continuously referenced in relation to age, with digital exclusion being one of the ways in which ageism can really manifest itself. And some other kind of interesting statistics there that you can take a look at. But it's clear that employers should be cognizant of these kind of prejudices. And we should think of the supports that people might need, whether it's working a PowerPoint or in terms of assisting with managerial issues, which again has been touched on already by Tanya. I think you mentioned, or Trudy, the importance of the manager-employee relationship is vital. So any supports there that the employer can provide is a great idea. So here goes. We're going to do a live report here. You're going to step in, are you? My younger colleague is here to work the technology. Yeah. So if you can take out your phones and go to mentimeter.com. So there is there, Mentimeter, mentimeter.com. And hopefully that will bring you through to the page. You should see a white box then at the top of the screen there. And if you can enter the code 29182910 and then click join. So that's 29182910 and click join. That hopefully will bring you through to a question. Do people see a question on their phones? Yeah? Great. The code is 29182910.
It's up the very top of the slide there as well on the screen.
Oh, yeah. So hopefully, if you've got through, you'll see a question then, do you believe you will have to work over the age of 66? And then you'll see the live results coming up here on the screen. So majority saying yes so far. Okay, clear majority saying they will have to work over the age of 66. And then if we go to the next question, would you like to work beyond the age of 66, just to see if this is less or more? Oh, neck and neck. Okay. Oh, a little bit more. That's interesting. And then, does your current job have a retirement age? Gosh. Okay, so big majority there that their employer has a retirement age, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. That's interesting. And then finally, if you just want to identify words that you think are the biggest problems you see emerging with age in the workplace, and then the words will come up on the screen. So we have flexibility, attitude, ignorance, delusional thinking, respect, rights, and yes. Okay, no, they're good words. I think it's the bigger the word, the more people have said it. Yeah, so rights are definitely of importance there. Okay, that's brilliant. Some more coming in. Thank you very much for that. Thank you, Conor.
The absolute fear of trying to get that to work. When I stayed up most of the night trying to practice that.
Oh no! So we're going to just quickly look at the legislation and the kind of legal stuff now. Thanks a million, Conor. So three kind of areas that I'm going to touch on. Obviously, the employment equality legislation is the big one. We'll have a little look at mandatory retirement ages and then the code of practice on longer working hours as well. So there they are. In terms of the Employment Equality Act then, you're probably all completely aware that the employment equality legislation prohibits discrimination in relation to 9 grounds, as we've spoken about, age being one of them. So the other ones are gender, civil status, family status, disability, sexual orientation, race, religion and membership of the traveller community. And it seeks to protect from age discrimination in both direct and indirect. So direct is where something is really obviously less favourable on the ground of age. So, for example, setting an upper age limit of, say, 50, only under 50s need apply. Indirect, then, is seemingly harmless, but has a greater adverse impact on workers of a certain age. So, for example, the requirement to have worked in a certain industry for a particular number of years. So, taking my own example, there used to always be a tendency for law firms to say you must have 10 years PQE, post-qualification experience, and the Law Society have recommended against that because that discriminates against younger people, actually, who haven't had the chance to get their qualifications and experience. So again, just emphasising that it's not always about the older worker. Younger workers can definitely be discriminated against too, and there's lots of case law there as well, where people have been discriminated against on the grounds that, you know, they're kind of dismissed as younger workers who don't have the experience of an older worker. So it seeks to prevent employers from discriminating against employees in relation to all of those areas that are up on the slide, the 5 areas. However, it's kind of a little bit weaker than the other protected grounds to a certain extent because there are exceptions to this general rule. One of the big exceptions is that mandatory retirement ages are still permissible, and I'll talk about that in a moment. But there are other things too, like the Act only starts applying to those over 16. Younger workers can be paid less than older workers. Pension schemes can fix different ages for admission and for benefits. And also employers can set maximum ages for recruitment if they don't feel there's going to be enough return on the training. So there's a few exceptions there that some would make it say it feels a wee bit weaker than the other protected grounds. And then, of course, mandatory retirement ages. This is a key example because they're still allowed, subject to certain conditions, of course. So mandatory retirement ages, while seemingly discriminatory on the age ground, they are permitted so long as the age is objectively justified. And this amounts to the age needing to serve a legitimate aim or purpose, and the means taken to achieve that purpose must be appropriate and go no further than is necessary. Lots and lots of case law about mandatory retirement ages at the moment. They've been dealt with in the Labour Court, WRC, High Court recently discussed it in the Mallon case there that's on the slide, the Labour Court in the Mayo County Council, and it's becoming increasingly difficult for employers to be able to stand over their retirement age, given this increased scrutiny. And probably I would say it's easier in the High Court and Supreme Court than it would be in the Labour Court, WRC. They are tending to find in favour of the employee unless the employer can point to a really genuine, robust business case for the retirement age that they have picked. And they can't start to try to invent it at a day before the hearing or anything like that. So examples of objective justification that have been accepted as valid are things like succession planning, intergenerational fairness, health and safety, of course, too, comes into play. So, as I said, ongoing debate about whether employers should be allowed to have a mandatory retirement age. And some commentators have likened it to the old bar on married women working in public sector back in the day, for fear that women would take positions that others could take. So there is that kind of similarity if you think about it. And some countries have outlawed mandatory retirement ages, save in very limited circumstances like UK, Sweden, Australia. So let's just wait and see if that trend continues in Ireland, I think. And we need to keep an eye on this whole area because traditionally in Ireland, employers set it at 65, which was the old state pension age. And then some employers started to link it to the state pension age. So it's still very common to see 65 in a contract of employment, though. And of course, that led to employees being made retire at 65 and then having to seek job seekers benefit for a year before they were entitled to the state pension, which is entirely unsatisfactory. Now they can avail of the benefit payment for 65-year-olds for that year, but given it's still at a lesser amount than the state pension, it's still unsatisfactory and not ideal. Looking at the Code of Practice on longer working hours, this is an important code if you're interested in this area from a legal perspective. It's kind of a sticking plaster over the situation, but the purpose of this code is to set out the procedural principles for employers and employees to bear in mind when employees are coming close to a retirement age. So there are certain requirements that employers are expected to deal with. Like, for example, an employer should provide a notification to the employee of the intention to retire them about 6 to 12 months of that date. So they shouldn't be coming to them a week before and saying, oh, you're out next week. Similarly, employees, if they wish to request the right to a fixed-term contract after their normal retirement age, should ask for that in good time, and certainly at least 3 months in advance. If the fixed-term contract is refused, the employee should be given reasons and a right of appeal as to why that was. So really, this code is all about maximising the experience of older workers and advocates the use of things like flexible working, training on age diversity, and really trying to encourage an age-inclusive environment at work. It's not legally binding, though. So the thing about codes of practice is that they're not legally binding. But if an employer finds themselves in court, it can be used as evidence against them. So definitely recommended that employers become really familiar with this code and make sure it's being followed. So in terms of the practicalities then, just another note about the law, I guess. It's worth remembering that the Employment Equality Acts also provide that employers may be vicariously liable for the acts of their employees. So if someone feels they've been bullied on the grounds of age or has been discriminated against at work, the employer will be held responsible, and it's not a good defence to say that they didn't know about it or didn't encourage it. So their exposure to liability will be reduced if they can point to the practical steps that they've taken to reduce the possibility of such discrimination occurring in the workplace. So what is best practice then? Obviously there's lots of ideas in the report that we can all take a good look at. But in terms of what some employers are doing, things like return to work programmes for older workers who've been out of the workplace, soft landing programmes, which would be similar to this kind of gradual lead up to retirement that Tanya was talking about, Flexible working is very helpful, and I guess post-COVID, post-pandemic, the world has changed for the better in that regard, and there's lots of legislation coming down the road which may help in terms of the right to request remote working, the work-life balance bill. I think that can only help. Things like removing upper age limits on things like apprenticeships, internships, continuous learning is always discussed as being absolutely vital at all levels. Age of retirement, consider raising it, or if you want to be brave, consider removing it altogether. And knowledge sharing to minimise the loss of know-how amongst the generations. Also, I'm reading a lot recently about the concept of reverse mentoring, where younger employees mentor their older managers, which I think is a great idea, and they can help managers with things like diversity, social issues, how to do a TikTok video, anything that might be of help. So that's definitely gaining traction. And also I've heard about intergenerational support groups within the workplace, which I think is a great idea as well. And just to finish up with some top 10 business practice tips, again, I'm kind of showing my bias here as someone who tends to advise a lot of employers, so they are kind of employer-related. But things like ensuring your recruitment material is age-neutral and non-discriminatory. Make sure you're not asking for people's date of birth anymore, but also make sure that when you get in someone's CV or application form that you're not racking your brain to go, well, if they did that then, they must be this age. You know, just try to think about the person and their competence rather than their age. Training is great. Make sure that your recruitment and decision makers are nice and diverse in terms of gender and age. And never, ever, ever base a decision to hire or not to hire or promote on a candidate's age or indeed any of the other protected grounds. So I shall leave it there. Thank you very much for listening, and I hope you find that interesting. Thank you.
Discussion there, and Conor, thanks very much for making the Mentimeter work. I think it's probably just a nice time maybe that we'd ask some questions, and then we're going to go to a tea coffee break before we hear from Neil and then from Sinead and Catherine, and then of course Tanya and myself will be talking about the solution oriented approach, some of the ideas that came through the report. So do we have any questions on either Mary's presentation, Tanya and myself with the report, or Catherine or Conor's presentation? Yes, please go ahead.
It's more of a comment. I was obliged to retire early on this year. I turned 65.
Sorry, did you want to come up here and tell us about it? And sorry, your first name is? Marion.
Yeah. I turned 65 in April, and my company asked me to stay on to the end of the quarter of that date so that I could help out on a big project we were doing. I did have no problem doing that, and I had paid for doing it. But look, this question of having to work or like to work, I mean, I would love to work, but I have to work, because all of a sudden you go from a very high salary down to €280 per week. Not a lot of money to live on. Nobody tells you about this. You know, if your company doesn't have one of these lovely retirement transitions in place, I mean, I would find out everything myself, and I had to go to the local unemployment office to find out what to do. So nobody told me, and I was delighted to get €280 per week. Every Wednesday tonight, and because I'm over 62, I don't have to go and pick it up at the local post office. Whereas if I were under 62, I would. Well, this comes into my bank account every week. I'm currently interviewing with different companies for part-time work. I think they balk at my age, but I'm still working on the age of 65. Any role I'm looking for is paid up to about 50% of my last salary. And really, I think that, oh yes, I had to fight with my employer to get a pre-retirement course. And I fought after I left, I did my pre-retirement course in September rather than doing it in February and March. I had to go to my employer to say, hey, no, I'm supposed to retire, or could we discuss it, but, and I'm in charge of HR, I'm the first person to leave the company. So whatever happens after me, I've said to them, you know, this has to be different to the next employee who's leaving, I won't be there. Although if you want me to come back and do part-time work or consulting, I can do that. So I'm very annoyed about the whole thing. And you know, one day you're working really hard on a huge project. That was the 30th of June. And the 1st of July, I was sitting at home, there's nothing to do, nowhere to go. Usually you should Deborah,
come over here, maybe.
you know? Yeah, sorry, I'm just probably ranting, but I've been through the experience very recently. It's not a nice experience. There's very little support. You find yourself from being totally busy one day to doing nothing the next day, and you know it takes a long time to get over that transition if you're not prepared for it. I wasn't prepared for it. I'm in charge of HR. I tried to be prepared for it as the first employee to leave a company, and I wasn't listened to. So I've had to make do myself since I left work. So the fact of would like to work, yes, but having to work to bring in some money, because you don't get anything except this €208 per week, which I didn't even know about. So it's great even to have that. I'm very grateful for it.
Can I just say, I think it's wonderful that you're sharing that experience with us. It's the real experience.
The real experience, yes.
If I could very briefly say, maybe, can I just throw out maybe a comment, or would anybody in the audience like to make a comment, maybe following on what you said, that might be a help, or just even, I just wonder, is there anything you'd like to make a comment on?
Was there any objective justification for a retirement age? Because somebody
No.
working in HR is just as able to do it today as they were when they were 55 or 25.
No, just you retire when you turn 65. But I stayed on for 3 more months because I was working on a big relocation project. There was a lot going on, and they needed the help. So I was quite happy. I was quite happy to stay, and I was quite happy to stay and finish it off. But employers don't want to talk about retirement; they're not interested. It just comes upon you, and it's only when you actually have to retire that you know what it feels like. If you're 55 or 60, you still don't know what it's like until you have to leave the workforce, hand in all your keys, your badge, all of that sort of thing, and you find yourself at home twiddling your thumbs the next day.
And I think what you're talking about is and I say this is a wonderful contribution, because it's very unexpected, and we're really delighted for that. But I think even I've heard actually about people working in RTE that were saying that one day they had this role, or they were this person in RTE, and then they were required to hand in their keys because they were 65 years of age. So it is something, I think you've raised something that's really important. Perhaps, unless, maybe, thanks very much for that, Marina. I think that's something that we'll come back to. Do we want to take maybe one maybe more comment or 2 more comments before we go for coffee tea break? Katrina?
Yeah, I just want to say something just in relation to...
Katrina, sorry, can I get you to come up here just for the live audience, if you don't mind? I'm sorry, it's just because we have people that are listening live, and it just might be great for them to be able to hear you.
In terms of the question, yeah. I just wanted to say, in relation to Mary's comment around the imagery, that even as an academic working in the institution here and working on ageing projects, that it's a constant battle around imagery and getting access to good quality imagery. So when you look for the banks of material that's available to use, it's very limited. It's often very Americanized or Northern European, or like they're really obviously not Irish pictures, particularly if you're engaging with an Irish audience. And even within the kind of the communications department, etc., in the university, like if we send something without the images that we wanted attached, we'd get back the wrinkly hands, and we'd get back the dark, dull images, people sitting alone on a bench, bent over. You know, they're very negative imagery, and I think the Irish Times, you regularly see the negative imagery there. So I just wanted to make that point, that it is all over the place, and once you become aware of it and you become vigilant, you have to be constantly on that. You have to be constantly pushing it. Otherwise, negative stuff just starts creeping in around the edges. So I just wanted to make that point, that even for those that are enlightened, you constantly have to be vigilant. Yeah. So just that point.
Thanks, Katrina. I really appreciate that. Helen, do you mind taking a bit? Sure. I hope you don't mind coming up to the podium, but it's just that our live audience, our audience and I will be able to see you.
It was a quick response to that. First, there's actually a really good image bank from the, I think it's a Centre for Positive Ageing in the UK. So they're a bit closer to Ireland. I've used some of them for my presentation, but they have a whole bank of images, photographs of positive ageing. So I can share the link to the group. My question was around, I suppose, it was discrimination in recruitment. So it seems older people are particularly vulnerable to discrimination in recruitment, more so than in the workplace. I mean, obviously that happens as well. So, but there's a difficulty, I suppose, for the person on the end of that to take such a case or to prove that they were discriminated against. So I'm just wondering, was there evidence from the review that you did around that, or from the legal side about how people who feel they've been discriminated against in recruitment, how they go about, I suppose, rectifying that. And you can see it in the unemployment figures. So older people are less likely to become unemployed, but they're more likely they remain unemployed longer. So that's where I'm coming from at it. Thanks.
That's actually a really interesting question you're raising here, and indeed it's something that really came up in the report. Particularly with regards to lifestyle, characteristics or life context of older people. But what I also found really interesting is that there's a really different perception when it comes to the education attainment. So the higher the education attainment is, the more people are looking forward to their retirement. But this situation is, of course, very different for people who have a lower education attainment. Some of them have to keep working. It's not by choice, but for necessity. And I think that's kind of dialoguing with what you were asking.
It was about discrimination in recruitment, I suppose.
Yeah. Well, they are really aware of it. I think we have a case study now. Just got a case study how real it is, and recruitment is definitely something that is really under researched. But we see that this is really the crux of the problem. Addressing ageism in recruitment. And I think, Catherine, you mentioned there are some really interesting things already regarding recruitment, and I think you can say much more about that than I can.
No, not much more. But yeah, like it is open to candidates for employment to bring a claim for discrimination if they feel the reason why they didn't get the job was something to do with their age. And there is lots of case law out there involving some of the big companies. Even Ryanair got in trouble for a job advert looking for young and lively employees, which discriminated against older workers. I guess the problem, though, is that the compensation available to someone who's not an employee, so a candidate who's bringing a claim, is limited. I think it's less than 10,000, is it, off the top of my head? And, so in terms of bringing litigation, that's very stressful and expensive. So perhaps, some candidates might think it's maybe not worth it. And also some people might be worried about their future employability by raising their head up above the parapet. And now claims in the WRC aren't anonymous anymore. That might have an impact upon it as well. But definitely, I would always say if a candidate feels that the reason they didn't get the job was related to any of the 9 grounds, it's certainly worth raising that by way of an appeal, by way of a letter. You have 6 months from the date of the decision to bring an actual claim. It's not that expensive to put in a claim to the WRC. So there is that protection there at least, yeah.
Thanks, Catherine. I think we're going to end with a comment from me. I'll just make one comment and then we'll come to you.
Just addressing that query, what we come across as people who represent employees as opposed to employers is that discrimination claims of all sorts, there are a myriad of them. It is, in many cases, very difficult to bring them forward because they happen in the dark. They happen, we don't have the notes of the job applicants' hearing. We don't get I'm talking for the most part with regard to private sector employees and not public sector employees. So that, on my own, a theoretical example, if you came for a job in my office and I interviewed you and I didn't like you because you were gay, I'm not likely to keep notes to that effect. So that even though you've been discriminated against, it is actually getting our hands on the evidence, but it happens, and that's the difficulty. Yes, it does. Very frequently, age is actually one of the grounds of discrimination. There are 8 other grounds. It is difficult at the employment or interview stage to prove those claims. We have, in many cases, done so, but it is difficult. It's not easy. And I don't know how to get over it. To be frank with you, it is a difficulty. So is that?
That's great.
Yeah.
That was really interesting. I'm actually very engaged in human resource studies, and I think a lot of what you just said has also to do with the organizational culture. The idea that we have to respect diversity, and by diversity I not mean ethnicity, but also age differences. And I think that's really the problem in business ethics, valuing ethics at the core of the business, and understanding that this could be actually turned into a competitive advantage. That when we are a very diverse organization, we are much stronger to extend the lifespan of an organization. And I think that's also comes back to our whole topic, ageism. How can we avoid ageism in recruitment? It's not only ageism, it's all biases, as you were talking about, the 9 grounds of discrimination. All of them are equally relevant, and it's not only ageism or any other. We have to consider all of them at the same level, and try to address them. Thank you.
Thanks very much. I think it's time for our tea coffee break. And when we come back, we'll have Neil is going to talk to us, and then Sinead, and then Hannah. So we'll take a quick tea coffee break. Just to say that you're all very welcome back. And can I just say to you that if you feel like a cup of coffee or tea at any stage, please feel free to have it here. I think that collectively we're all agreeing that it's a really interesting conversation that we're having together, and one that's very, very important. There are just some things I want to bring to your attention, and I think actually, Garvin, maybe the microphone is a little bit better than it was, which is great, because what I've been hearing is if presenters could actually speak up, because the microphone hasn't been great. However, I think it's been improved. I feel it myself, it's been improved since earlier on. So if you can't hear us at the back, just please be sure to put up your hand, and we will make sure that we do get to hear you. Before we have Neil present, I just wanted to say that we have Mary with us from Near FM, and Mary, we're delighted to have you. And Mary's just wondering if some of our presenters could actually maybe make contact with her at the end, either for a few minutes of an interview for now, or even to come and talk to you at a later stage. So it's just maybe to get some email addresses or some contacts that you'd like to follow up. Mary is a presenter with Near FM, so she really kind of embraces the stories, the interviews. So that's just to say that to you. Okay, without further ado, I'm going to introduce Neil, and Neil is going to carry on the conversation from, is it fair to say, Neil, from a legal or legislative perspective?
Thank you, Trudy, and thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to come here to speak to what is a central tenet of the firm of which I am an aged employee. Now, age discrimination occurs everywhere. I'll come to that in a minute. But I recently had a personal example of it, where I went to Woody's. And did you know that on Tuesdays, Woody's have a 10% discount for over 65s, which they gave me, much to my chagrin. I'm not 65. Yeah, but I took the 10% discount. So that's it. Anyway, when I was doing some research for this, I found it fascinating reading the literature, because it is not often that as a practicing lawyer that I actually read the literature. I am aware of the legislation and how we try and put into practice, but it was fascinating to read through the report to see how it has in touch to every portion of everybody's life. So particularly as we get a little bit older in life. Now, I'm going to hopefully move this on. What is discrimination? Well, very broadly, when you're treated differently because you're older. Over 25s into a nightclub. I had a lovely case years ago when my daughter was going to UCD and they wouldn't let her into a nightclub, so a number of students in UCD took a discrimination claim against the nightclub and were successful. The nightclub caved in and let them in. But it was great fun. They did all the work as law students, and it was just great fun doing it. I enjoyed it. But then we've talked about you have to retire at 65, or you've got 10 years experience. As I get towards this age of 65, in the community that I live in, I have more people coming to me and said, Neil, they want me to retire at 65 or whatever. So it attracts more of those clients to me because I'm that age, and that's something I'll address later on. Where does discrimination occur? Well, when does it happen? It happens everywhere and all the time. Consciously or subconsciously, we're subject to it. And I was very taken by a word used by the President when he spoke at the beginning. It is pernicious. That's a great word. It is onomatopoeic. Does anybody remember what that is from school? It describes what ageism is. It gets into all of our lives. We describe it like, come back. You've heard the phrases, and it gets to us from a young age. You're over the hill. Right? Doesn't matter how you get, you're over the hill. You're an old maid. That's a particularly pernicious phrase. You're left on the shelf. Another pernicious one that's done. And you can't teach an old dog new tricks. They're sayings, they're words that were very powerfully expressed to us in the first presentation by Mary, the power of words. And before I deal with the law part of it, I want to say that if we're going to change, we have to start, like everywhere else, we start at a young age. And we are capable of change. Look, in particular, for instance, I give one example only, and that is drink driving. When I was a teenager, drink driving, it may not be socially acceptable, but it wasn't a matter of the same sort of poor behaviour that is regarded as now. My children would not drink and drive. They just wouldn't. It's a no-no. Whereas for an older generation, we did. Our plastic bag levy, our smoking at work, we can change, and I hope that we do. I don't know where. I do not have the answer about where the resources are, but I just accept that people in Ireland can and will change. And I'm going to say, where are the benefits? Right, I'm looking at Conor, he's working with William Fry's. He's being mined for his energy, his enthusiasm, his longevity, his stamina, and the older partners, and I'm definitely not referring to Catherine, but the older partners with William Fry, they should be mined. We should mine our older people for their experience and their flexibility and their dependability. They're all the things that they have had to deal with throughout their lives. Now, here I am going to really embarrass Catherine and Conor, because there are three of us from William Fry. I did my apprenticeship in William Fry in 1980 to 1983, and I worked for 3 years after I left there. I have expressed in my life, this is off the cuff, in my life I've said many times, there are law firms in the world as good as William Fry, but there is not a law firm in the world better than William Fry. That is how highly I rate that organisation. It's where I come from, it's where my training comes from. But how flexible is my generation? I had a discussion with Freya a minute ago. I believe that the people of my generation, people slightly ahead of me, the people coming behind me, we should be valued for what we are. When I went into William Fry's, they had typewriters, right? That's what they had, typewriters. They had one fax machine where it came out in a big roll. Is anybody here old enough to remember that? Look, came out a big roll. They actually had a telex machine. Does anybody here even know what a telex machine is? Right? All those things. And when they educated me, they brought in their systems, and we all developed. I have had a mobile phone for 37 years. Like, I remember when a mobile personal communication device like that was only seen in Star Trek. You with me? Literally. And that's how much this generation has developed in that. We've done more than anybody else. So I think we should be mined. We need to be. We are brilliant. Right? So that's about, yeah. Now, the law. Ireland has a good reputation and a good record of enacting legislation to prevent discrimination of all sorts. In this particular case, we've adopted it at an early stage. I'm not going to tell you what the acts are, but we've always done it. But legislation is only one of the tools that we will need. Okay, it's only one of the tools. The other tool is education and perception and how we get through to that. So, okay, now, this is very interesting for anybody that's involved in ages discrimination. Discrimination, including age discrimination, is the one area where you don't need contract of employment. Right? You can sue your employer, the employer, simply because they've discriminated against you. It goes back to the comment I made before, T. It is difficult for an employee to bring home such a case. The areas that Sean's firm, or myself and Sean, advise most frequently, we're trying to analyse these for the presentation, but ones that we that come into us for reference frequently are discrimination at interview stage. On one side, discrimination, a lesser amount on promotion, and a very significant amount now coming through about discrimination upon termination of employment. But the ones that have to do with discrimination at interview or start date are very difficult to bring home. I don't know how to do it. If we don't have the records, if you don't actually have a recording, what can you do? It is very difficult. I'm sorry, I just don't know what the answer is, whether there has to be a standardised interview sheet or whatever. Very conscious of the fact that, from an age point of view, that you're not asked age-related questions at your interview. So when I'm going through the advice that I'm going to give my employee clients, I ask them to set it out for me. What happened? What day was it? Where is it? Give me a copy of the advertisement. Did you make any notes yourself? What did people say? What was the attitude that you were given? Now, it is not an impossibility. The Workplace Relations Commission and the Equality Tribunal, all those people are very good about allowing us to make the case. They will give us a lot of leeway in doing so. The WRC is great, lad. For fellas like me, they're great fun. I can be obnoxious and I can be cynical and I can be all sorts of things because whilst it's a legal tribunal, it gives you a bit of leeway. So you can fight your client's case with some of the less, shall we say, legal norms, if you know what I mean. You can bring a little bit of acting into it. I shouldn't, but anyway, a little bit of something. So, but you have to have a good basis, and it's up to them to then prove it. So, but they're the employment side ones. They're the interview stage. They're difficult. The age discrimination and retirement cases are much. The employee, you must keep records, dates, times, who said what. If you're discriminated within the workplace, I ask them to give me a copy of your contract of employment, the workplace handbook, and then go and get advice. So they're the simple things, they're the common sense, but that's what we do with our clients. Then, when we're going to, so I'm going to come back. Sorry, track record. Termination. Termination by retirement or termination by redundancy. There are two types. Termination when you get to 65, you're being retired, out. We have an example of that. But also termination by reason of redundancy. And there's two aspects of it, one of which I haven't fought. One is last in, first out. That's discriminatory because the younger people get tossed out, nothing to do with their ability, and the older people get kept. But other types of redundancy are done on grounds of cost, perhaps. So who's the most expensive person? The people that have been there longest. But is it objective? You must have objective reasons for discriminating against these people, and it's very hard to do so. That's in redundancy. Termination by reason of retirement is precisely the same. You have to have reasonable, researched grounds for forcing somebody to retire. There are very few of those. The Workplace Relations Commission has been scathing of a number of cases where people said, no, it's the norm in the industry, you're retired at 65. Show me the proof. Show me the evidence. You are pushing an open door if there isn't evidence based there. I'm going to skip on to times. This is for employers. I'll come back to it if I may. It's illegal unless there's real object and provides advancement. Now, one of the seminal cases in respect of what's acceptable for a person upon retirement is actually a lawyer. It's a case where a partner in a large firm was forced to retire at 65 and he didn't want it, and he took them on and it went the whole way and he wasn't successful. Why? Because the firm in the partnership deed had set out a pathway of progression for their partners, and it set out why they need to have these vacancies ahead to encourage the younger lawyers, Conor, to move into these spaces that they become available. And secondly, again, because large firms, they didn't want the indignity, not the dignity, the indignity of older partners being forced to the same level of performance because they may or may not be capable. But so he was unsuccessful. So the lawyers are one of those areas where you can objectively justify getting him out. So now, and if an employee makes a claim, they only really have to show what we call a prima facie, an outline case of discrimination, and then the onus will shift to the employer to justify that. So that's the great entry for us employee-related lawyers. We get in there and say we've got a prima facie case, and we force the employer to come and justify it. The EU regulation, this is almost central. The EU regulation provides that if a claimant brings a claim before a tribunal and is successful, the award should be effective, proportionate and dissuasive, not just for age but discrimination generally. And it is very much a case that is so. It has been our experience that I'm going to speak very generally about discrimination here now, not just age discrimination, but about discrimination. And it doesn't, if we can get an age or a discrimination case over the line with one of the tribunals, it is generally at a higher level of award than a simple bullying and harassment or dismissal, unfair dismissal, or all of those other things. If we can get the awards are very substantial. You may have seen an article in the Irish Times at the beginning of this week, I think, about a case that Sean handled where there was sexual harassment involved, but sexual harassment is a form of discrimination, and the award handed down was very significant. There is a case in academia involving UCD where one of the academics was discriminated on grounds of age for not getting promotion, and it was all backdated. Okay, so you have all of that. So the awards are higher. Okay, if we get a client in that wants to pursue one of those and has the proof, in particular with regard to retirement, I won't say we have a better chance of making our money out of them, because very often the clients don't have the means to pursue it themselves. They don't. Lawyers are very expensive, and we're not expensive deliberately. It's expensive to run an office and pay staff and heating and lighting and rates. So we charge by the hour. So it's not cheap to hire a lawyer, and we don't, pick the figure out of our heads. So if we can say to the client, yes, we think you'll be successful, there's a better chance that we will do, from our own point of view, we'll do well out of it. I'm not being big. So that's been our experience. Now, what that has also led us to is our ability to settle those cases. So we have many employers who are well advised by the firms of solicitors that they go to say, you're in trouble here, or you may be in trouble here, please settle. Are you with me? So because this discrimination, lads. I can't really describe it any better than that. You with me? If it walks like a duck and it quacks like a duck, it's probably a duck. With regard to discrimination, I'm not making light of it when I say that, but we sort of see it when it happens. Oh no, that's the last one. where was I? I lost my train of thought. Going back to we get better settlements because the employer gets good advice about saying we don't think you'll be successful. A successful case for an employee where they get an award, a substantial award, is very expensive from an employer's point of view. They have the cost of the award. They have the cost of an enormous amount of management time that goes into the preparation and fighting of such a case, which may go on for more than 1 or 2 or 3 days in the relevant tribunal. It may be appealed. And then they've got their own lawyer to pay. You with me? So they are recognising that they must deal with it if they get the proper advice to do so. And I'm going to go back then and go back to employers. And the cases where we are less successful with regard to age discrimination and where we advise our clients to settle more quickly is when the employers have set out a structured retirement plan. Thanks be to God, there's very few of them. They just don't do it yet. So they had structured retirement, contract of employment. It should say it in the contract of employment. Set it out in the workplace handbook also. Make all the employees aware of why it's in there and make them aware of why you have it in there. It's not just to make you retire. We have reasons. We need to make the space for young people to come through or not. And also implement what's known as the Workplace Relations Code of Practice with regard to age discrimination, or at least pay lip service to it. If it can be demonstrated to us that you've done all those things, you're going to be more successful with regard to the defence of your claim. And the better employers do that. But I'm going to step back to what happens with me at the moment with people of my generation that are coming to me now because I'm a certain age. And Waterford is a small village, guys. There's only about 50,000 of us. So you're known and you're of a certain age, so you can be talked to. So people come to me now that know me and say, we're going. And I keep telling them, go in and challenge it. Go in and challenge it. Go in and challenge it. And they're doing so. So they can do so. Do not stop yourself. Even if it's in your contract of employment, go in and challenge it. It has to be objective. It has to have sensible and reasonable grounds before they can do it. And if they don't do it, then take a claim. I'm not advocating claiming. I also have a phrase about litigation is the greatest waste of man's time. That's a personal belief. So we have those, all right? And finally, it's pretty well much ado about nothing, because we are the golden generation. They are going to come head-hunting us when I get to 65 and 68. We have it. You understand? There's no reason why we shouldn't believe in ourselves. Will it be in 10 years' time they're going to come knocking on all the doors of anybody 60? Stay, please don't go. That's what I hope is going to happen. I believe that we're capable of it. So I'm hoping that it's much ado about nothing, but it's a reality, but I'm hoping it will become much ado about nothing. And finally, I offer this only as a counterpoint to the research that has been done. I would love you to see somebody do some sort of a search. I heard Australia mentioned as one of those that's abolished a minimum retirement age. When I was in Australia 20 odd years ago, they had compulsory pension contributions by all of the employees. It would be very interesting to see over the next generation, does that make a lot of people who can provide for themselves outside employment retire and not go back to work at the age of 65? Because I would love to see the case where I work beyond a certain age because I want to, but I don't have to. And I think we've introduced this compulsory pension enrolment, and hopefully this is a conversation they look back historically and in 50 years' time and say, look at them, that was much ado about nothing, we don't have to work anymore. So I hope giving you some insight about where I come from. Thank you very much.
Neil, thanks very much for that additional, very interesting conversation around legislation in relation to this area, and I think it very much complements what Catherine and Conor were discussing in relation to this area. If it's all right with you, because I think sometimes collective questions are great at the end of a few sessions. And so I'm now going to introduce Sinead. And Sinead Gibney is the Commissioner for the Irish Human Rights Equality Commission. And what's really interesting about Sinead's work is Sinead looks at the 9 grounds of discrimination in relation to, in the context of a human rights issue. And I just think that's a really important one, and it's one that we need to actually put at the heart of our work when we're actually looking at ageism in the workplace and ageism in the society. So without further ado, Sinead, I'm going to get you to come and talk to the audience.
Thanks so much, Trudy, and it's a real pleasure to be here today. I don't have a PowerPoint presentation, and my notes are kind of all over the place because, as I said to Trudy, there's so many ways in which I can come at this. So I'm kind of going to try and first, I suppose, talk about this topic at a high level and respond to some of the comments and topics that have arisen already today. And then I'm going to provide some pointers on, and these are things, again, that we've touched on already, some of the whys and hows of age equality strategies in the workplace and why they're important. And then I want to get into some of the work that IREC does, some of the efforts that we have, and there's so many ways in which we touch on this area. I wanted to start, though, by maybe letting you know a bit about my own personal journey in terms of age and ageing and my own background in it. So I'm Chief Commissioner now of the Irish Human Rights and Equality Commission. I was the inaugural director of this organisation as well. So through an equality and a human rights lens, ageism is one of the areas that we work in. But in one of my previous roles, I was head of corporate social responsibility for Google Ireland. And within that role, I led a programme to address digital exclusion of older people. And when we were choosing that theme for our work, we very purposefully chose what was at the time a juxtaposition, I would say, of a young tech company associated with an older audience. But for us, it made sense. We had set out some principles around what we wanted to do, and it really touched on that because it was a universal problem, a global problem, but something we could deal with very locally. And also it impacted business, and most successful CSR programs have to ultimately contribute to the bottom line. But helping older people get online, and this was 10, 12 years ago now, so we had much lower rates of internet adoption in the older generations, was really something that made business sense as well. But I have to say that on a personal level, it helped me become educated and aware of ageing and ageism, and it helped me connect with the NGO network of age organisations and organisations that support older people. And honestly, on a personal level, it was transformational, and I believe has made me a happier and more rounded person, because I simply shifted my thinking into a much more positive way about ageing. And I mean, some of the phrases we've heard today about how it is a privilege to age. It's much better than the alternative. But also around, that light bulb moment when you do see the cards and the depiction of age that we are all subjected to, and how that sinks into us and seeps into us and really affects our own perception about ageing and makes us negative about ageing, which is so problematic. And I think that phrase that Mary put out earlier was really important. Ageism is a prejudice against your future self. I think it really captures how important it is to look inwardly when we talk about ageism. And at the time as well, on another personal level, my grandmother lived with us. There was 4 generations in the house. I was a single mum, and I was living with my parents at the time when I had my baby. And my grandmother lived with us, and she did need care. So it helped me understand that frailty that she was experiencing, the dependency that she experienced, is a minority of older people. It was 5% at the time, I think, was really what was, if we think about older people as 65 plus, that only 5% of those people are actually dependent, or actually fall into the category of frailty. So we all have a huge amount of work to do, and a constant piece of work to do to change those attitudes, I think. And going back to Dara's introduction, I also wanted to comment on how I think DCU, it was really actually interesting to hear his, I thought, very humble comments around the work that UCD has to do in terms of, as an organisation, welcoming more students, because personally, from outside, I associate DCU with being an age-friendly campus, with doing a lot of work to attract older learners, to help older learners embrace online learning and so on. So I just wanted to comment as well on that. In IREC, this is a strategic priority for us. Under our third strategic priority of the strategy that we launched this year, respect and recognition, we talk about combating and eradicating ableism, sexism, ageism, and there's another ism that I can't remember off the top of my head. There's so many. But ageism was very purposefully put in there because it is one of the lesser spoken about. It's one of the lesser prominent areas of discrimination, and we want to address that, and particularly in the wake of COVID and the experience of older people during that time. And the other thing I want to say in response to today's conversation is I really like the approach that this research has taken and today's event has taken in using that language of ageism and positioning this as a discrimination, because, I mean, you mentioned, Trudy, and it's not to diminish the equality, diversity and inclusion work that goes on in organisations like universities and companies. I think those initiatives are to be lauded and absolutely they're important pieces of work, but unfortunately they are not creating the change we need to see quickly enough. And so I think it's really important to situate this in the hard legal truth of the obligations of employers and the rights of employees against ageism. And I think that's a really important way to situate it. So we have a public information line where members of the public can get information on their rights and remedies available under equality law in Ireland. And these queries are a real indicator for us on the live issues and discrimination that people are reporting under the age ground. And some of the examples of the types of queries raised to the Commission, I just wanted to touch on some of them now, and then I'm going to also read a quote from a recent case we had. A woman took sick leave due to an injury, the injury and its duration exacerbated by her age, and upon returning to work, her employer told her that she was no longer suitable for the role. And she concluded that this was due to her age and sick leave. Another woman who contacted us was dismissed from her employment during the pandemic. Several other employees were being dismissed also, and she believes it was due to her age and underlying health conditions. And she felt that her perceived risk to COVID due to her age and disability influenced that decision of her employer to dismiss her, rather than potentially needing to accommodate that risk instead. And we also hear about age discrimination in the recruitment process, and I know that's been touched on already, and that the feedback, for example, cited that relevant experience wasn't recent enough, for example. That's one of the ones I think we often find in the interview process. But I wanted to read a quote for you from somebody. This is from a woman to whom we provided legal assistance in her successful challenge of age discrimination against her employer. To receive the justice that is deserved is a great feeling, but it has been a long and arduous path to get here. I loved my job and the people I worked with. However, I consistently deemed the treatment I received regarding my retirement to be unjust and discriminatory based on my age. I sincerely hope, after this lengthy battle, that they will ensure no staff member will have to endure this prejudice, and that they will be provided with the opportunity to retire with dignity and pride. And I have to agree with Trudy. I know it was ad hoc to hear from your own story, Marion, but it's so important to hear about the lived experience, and I think it was a real privilege to hear about your very, very real and very personal story. I'm a single mum, and although I'm in a public sector role now where I have a pension, I have a pension contribution that's happening, I haven't been in a position, and even I was working in a well-paid job in the tech sector, but I couldn't because I was providing for my daughter. So I have no intention of retiring at 65 or 66 or anywhere near it. I mean, I'm also lucky to be in a role where I love my job. But I am of the opinion that I have much to contribute right into my 60s, 70s, 80s and even 90s. And if you look at world leaders, for example, right now with our own wonderful Michael D. Higgins, with President Biden, who are nailing it in their roles, I would say. I mean, whatever, I know I'm apolitical in this role, but it's so bizarre that we see that such an important role we accept can be done at that age, and yet we ask of people that they leave when I believe we are at a point in our lives when we have so much to offer. So I personally believe that I'll be working until I die, and I relish it. I really want to do that. I'd rather not work maybe at quite the same pace, and I think that's another issue, and I think automation plays into this as well. I put that into the word cloud because we are seeing work change. Labour is going to be displaced in a way that we just don't anticipate. We can't get our heads around right now, and I know we talk about AI, but it's kind of one of these cycles that will all of a sudden become quite quick. I mean, I think if you look at the US, for example, they're saying that now 25%, if and when automated cars, self-driving cars finally work, 25% of the US workforce could be displaced. Like, that's a massive figure and a displacement that we just have never dealt with to that same degree. So I think there's lots of ways in which the world of work is going to change, and we need to be thinking about it and not just being so frightened of a number going from 65 to 66 or to 67, but thinking instead about, I mean, the retirement age of 65 was set, I believe, when life expectancy was 60. We now live so much longer and so much longer healthier. And I really think we have a lot of work to do as a society to catch up with that. I want to touch briefly, before I go into the age equality strategies, on just a couple of other points more generally. And one of them is that digital divide, which I know has been mentioned already. And we've raised real concerns about the extent to which the digital divide is exacerbating existing social inequalities and further isolating groups within society, including older people. And in the wake of COVID, another one of our strategic priorities is to really look at how that cannot happen again, that in another crisis, and we know that there will inevitably be future crises, that people are not left behind because of that digital inequality, because it's quite likely that in future crises we will once again rely on it. And we receive reports from our public information line, again, of older people reportedly being pushed off services by this move online, trouble in accessing services like revenue, credit unions and banks. And we've recommended that the WRC actually commission an independent review of its own complaints procedures under the Equal Status Act to ensure that they are genuinely accessible to older people. And as we've heard, it's so important that that's the case. But I think one of the other interesting things about the digital divide, and again this goes back to my own experience from Google, is the really negative and ill-informed assumptions about digital literacy and age. Because, I mean, as we heard from Neil, he's had a phone for 37 years. My daughter is 21 and she is digitally literate in a lot of ways and digitally utterly illiterate in other ways. So we call them digital natives in the younger generations, but there's a lot of very bad practices in those generations, and there's a lot of ways in which they interact with certain applications and not in a lot of professional kind of applications or ways that we might expect. So I think we make assumptions about older equals digitally illiterate, younger means literate, and I just don't believe that that's the case at all. And I think systems and institutional behaviours like that, they end up posing barriers to the participation of older people on foot of some of that decision making, and it really leads to outcomes that excludes older people. And intersectionality then is the other piece that I just wanted to touch on briefly, because I think we've heard about this today, for example, particularly about that retirement choice, because intersectionality is so important. It's important in our equality law, and I'll touch on that shortly. But in terms of, for example, those people who have been in lower paid work, which tends to be more manual work, it tends to be harder work that you can't push into your 60s. So although I speak about my own experience, I am aware, and I want to check my own privilege, that I'm speaking from a point of view where I know I can work in this type of a role further into my life. But it's important to recognise poverty, the socioeconomic status of people and how that interacts with it, but also how older disabled people are discriminated against in a different way, how older women are discriminated against in a different way, and of course older ethnic people, older ethnic minorities discriminated against in different ways as well. So on to equality strategies, and I just want to kind of talk about a little bit about the how and why of it. And we've heard a lot about kind of from the employer and employee perspective. So I'm going to come at it from both of those angles. But there's huge benefits for organisations that do go further and are proactive in building a culture of equality and human rights that permeates the workplace. Equality and human rights make sense for business, and research has proved that taking action on equality and diversity improves productivity, that it leads to increased market share, as focusing on equality for customers helps a business to understand its customers better. And that was something that was really, when I was working in Google 10, 15 years ago, they were only getting their heads around it, I would say, in the tech sector, how important it was that they had female engineers designing products for female users, for example. It builds a company's reputation with staff, suppliers and customers. It creates a better work environment for staff. It increases innovation, problem solving and effective decision making within companies. And it reduces the risk, crucially, of damaging discrimination cases that sap staff morale and damage the company's reputation with customers. So the employer's benefits, the improves employment practices, have a broader pool of potential employees. That's one of the immediate ones. I mean, one of the things we did last year was we provided guidance for employers on accessing people in the direct provision system, because there's a huge issue in terms of people just don't think as employers that they can access people in the direct provision system, but past a certain point in your application process now people can access employment. That's on foot of the 2017 NHV case, which secured the right to work for people in the international protection system. So if you really do truly embrace inclusion in your work practices, you always create that better pool of talent to draw from. And you attract and retain a diverse customer base. An organisation employing a diverse workforce will have that better understanding of the diversity in customer base that they're facing. And you avoid the unlawful discrimination, costly legal fees, as we've heard about, lawyers do cost money, and the bad publicity that comes with any such case. And employees benefit because there is a good mix of people and experience providing the elements needed for an exciting and innovative workplace to flourish. I did a really interesting training a few years ago with, I won't mention the company, but they wanted to do a training specifically about how to help different generations in their workplace to talk to each other. They had identified that they technically had 5 generations. There was 2 different categories of baby boomers. I can't remember which. Do anyone know what There's like a late boomer, I can't remember. There was some terminology between how boomers were split, and then there was the Z generation, or X, Y, and millennials, I can't remember. But they wanted to do this training to help the different generations to talk to each other more effectively and to communicate more effectively. So I got into it, but the issue I had with it, and I suppose the reason I mention it, is because it was the entirely wrong approach, because essentially it was coming from an older cohort of staff who were designing the training and essentially just wanted to be able to tell the young people how to talk to them. So I flipped it around a bit and got them to create much more of a dialogue where all of the generations were speaking to each other, learning from each other, and some of those great practices we heard from earlier on about reverse mentoring and helping each other in the workplace and creating that richer environment. And if this is probably the one line we can take away today in terms of how to facilitate the equality strategies, it's about choice, and choice is important. Because older people, as I've tried to get across already, are not a homogenous group. So we have people coming at this from many, many different ways, and creating, particularly around retirement, choices for people. And I hadn't heard that term, the soft landing. I think that's a really nice way to capture it. But, you know, different options for different people who have different needs is so crucial. Because many people do now wish to continue work for longer. So I'm going to just now finish by talking about some of the areas of work that we're in, particularly, and I forgot to hit the timer start, so I hope I'm not too far over, but particularly 2 pieces and then some of the resources. And the 2 pieces are the current equality law review that's going on, and then secondly the public sector duty, and obviously that applies only to public sector employers. The Equality Law Review is an initiative that's happening at the moment on foot of an announcement in June of last year by Minister O'Gorman that he wished to review equality legislation in Ireland. So our equality law, our equality legislation framework, is based on the Employment Equality Acts and the Equal Status Acts that were both brought into being around the turn of the century. And at the time they went actually beyond what was required at EU level. They were very progressive. 20 years on, they are obsolete to a certain degree. They're out of date. We have become a more diverse society, but also legal practice has changed. And our understanding of discrimination has changed and how people can combat discrimination. So that's the premise, essentially, that the Minister has introduced this. And we are engaging very heavily with this process because one of our functions as a Commission is to keep under review laws, policies and practice in the state that relate to equality and human rights. So it's very much square in our remit. Now, I think largely the focus of the departmental work will be along the grounds, and the Minister is looking at the introduction of a new ground on socioeconomic status, which is brilliant and very exciting, and also one around gender identity to better protect trans people against discrimination. But what we're encouraging within that is to really look more broadly at some of the loopholes and problems that have emerged. So I was just chatting to our William Fry team here about some of them. So, for example, just simply the misnomer of the Workplace Relations Commission and the fact that it's called the Workplace Relations Commission when actually it deals with all discrimination cases, which makes itself not very inviting for people when they don't know that. And I was on an interview a little while ago, and a broadcaster was totally unaware, actually, quite a prominent broadcaster did not know that it dealt with anything beyond workplace. And then other things like the Intoxicating Liquor Act, which is a place where any discrimination that happens on the basis of entry to a premises is not dealt with in the WRC. So it makes it, and the people who are most affected by that are travellers and people with disabilities, and they have to take their cases in a less accessible and less friendly environment of, I can't remember, is it the district or circuit? The district court. So, the WRC for its faults is a really brilliant place for self-advocacy and for people to take claims, so just another important way. But I suppose our key message with equality legislation is that discrimination should be prevented rather than treated after. The reality is, and Neil has been very clear on this, a lot of people who experience discrimination don't have the capacity or the means to deal with it. Like, we see people who've been discriminated against in housing cases. They need to find a roof for their family. They don't have time to say, this landlord discriminated against me because I was in receipt of HAP. They can't do it. So without massive assistance. So I think what we really want to see is much more preemptive, much more obligation placed on the employers or the duty bearers who might be actually conducting the discrimination. And within that, of course, the experience of older people is going to be a part of it. So there has been a consultation. There'll probably be a bit more consultation opportunity. So I would encourage everyone to get involved in that. And then the public sector duty. So when we talk about that kind of preemptive piece, actually the public sector duty is a really good example of how that's already been borne out in the public sector. So since 2014, all public sector bodies have an obligation within their work to prevent discrimination, to provide for equality of outcome and for the human rights of their staff and service users. And actually one of the recommendations we made in our consultation is that kind of public sector duty thinking could be extended into the private sector potentially. Now that would be a massive win. I don't necessarily expect it to happen this time, but it's definitely the type of initiative that we need to see, where there is this obligation that allows for harder law and harder obligations as opposed to maybe just the kind of nice to have EDI initiatives that currently deal with this. But the public sector duty, nonetheless, is a really important way, we believe, for public sector bodies to combat discrimination before it happens for both their staff and service users. And finally, just to give you some of the things that we have, which I think might be helpful, on rights in the workplace, if I could point you to the IREC website, where in March we published new statutory codes of practice that focus on the elimination of pay inequality and tackling workplace harassment and sexual harassment, and that has practical guidance on the right to equal pay, how to eliminate pay inequality and to resolve pay disputes. And we also launched a code of practice, again a statutory code of practice on harassment and sexual harassment, which sets out policies and procedures to tackle workplace harassment and sexual harassment. And we have a couple more codes of practice coming down the pipeline. So these are ministerial sign-offs, and they allow for, I think, just particularly in those instances, a great resource where it's quite nebulous for a lot of employers, particularly small employers, and it can be a way of just getting all of that information into one place. So those are some of the resources. I feel like I've missed a few bits and pieces, but thank you so much, and I'm looking forward to question times, and a pleasure to be here today. Thank you, Trudy.
Before we take Helen's presentation, I just thought this might be timely. Just if you did have questions, there'd be maybe just a few minutes, 2-3 minutes to take some questions, or maybe if you want to add some comments. So I don't know if anyone has any questions they'd like to ask or add some comments. Yeah, hey Sam. Sam, sorry, would you like to come up here? Can I just say that Sam is here representing IBEC? Yeah.
Given that the European Commission have the European Commission have the Year of Skills next year, do we think that lifelong learning might be a way to both showcase to employers the value and the continued ability of people who might be considered older workers, if that's over 51 or whatever we've decided that is? Because we've seen it in the workplace, and you see with members that sometimes there's even that internalised, well, who'd have me at this age? And that starts with people who've just turned 40 up until retirement. And people, and especially with women, you hear a lot more, well, I don't have value anymore, or I can't add. And education does often reinvigorate people. It has something on the CV that shows, well, I've done this and I've continued, that I'm not losing my ability or my ambition to grow as an employee. And next year, is there an ability for DCU and IREC and IBEC to kind of work on that, where lifelong learning can feed into overcoming those stereotypes?
Thanks, Sam. Sorry. Can I just add to that that's actually a recommendation that we actually were considering, which is the idea of developing educational programmes, going back to what Mary was saying about ageism across the life course, that from very early stage right to later stage. So we very much endorse that as well. Any other questions or any other comments? Yeah, Mary.
Kind of a comedy question. So I suppose one of the joys of working in an NGO is that you can be a little bit provocative at times. So one of the things I heard, Sinead, if you don't mind, I heard you on the radio about 2 weeks ago talking about housing for the pressure on the housing system from people coming into the country from Ukraine and people on the housing list. And I think, if I can, I think that you were making the point that both of those groups of people have a right to housing, and that one group, the government can't put one group's, the narrative about we don't have enough houses for ourselves, but that you can't put one group's rights above the other group's rights. I think that's what you said on the radio. And it seems to me here that there is a little bit of a narrative about older people who have a right to work, moving over to make room for younger people. And just to kind of maybe put that out there to say, actually, is it acceptable that if you want to work beyond the age of 65, and I think it is one of the derogations, is that kind of having an age diverse profile in the workforce. But is it acceptable that the rights of one group of people are maybe set above the rights of another group of people? And so anyway, just to throw that out maybe for discussion later.
Mary, that's very thought-provoking. That I suppose what we're actually saying is there space for both. That there is often that argument about that older people are taking from the jobs of younger people, but perhaps do we need a different mindset about this and say actually there's a role for both? And it's a very interesting one that you're raising. Okay, at this point I'm going to introduce Professor Helen Russell. And Helen, we're delighted to have you here today from the Economic and Social Research Institute. And Helen actually has conducted, I think together with colleagues, very interesting research around just the whole context of older people in Ireland in terms of the workforce, the ageing workforce. And I know, Helen, when we spoke on the phone, you were saying this isn't specifically around, for example, age discrimination, but it's about just what's out there in terms of the statistics and the data around the ageing workforce. And it's a really important report, so we'd be delighted to hear your views on that. So, Helen, I'm going to introduce you now at this stage.
Thanks very much. Actually, just to pick up on your last point, if you look across countries, you find that the countries that have higher levels of employment amongst older people are also the ones that have higher level of employment across the age distribution. So there doesn't seem to be that cancelling out, at a macro level. So just to put that out there. Okay, so as Trudy said, we did some work a couple of years ago with the HSA, the Health and Safety Authority, around the ageing workforce, working longer, and basically the focus, the lens that we were looking at this through was around working conditions and health, and what can be done to retain people in the labour market longer. So I suppose by way of background, extending working lives is a key policy goal, not only of social policy in Ireland, but also of the EU. And that comes from, I suppose, a variety of perspectives. Sustaining the welfare and pension system is a key focus of that policy debate, but there is also, from the other side, it comes from the positive ageing perspective and an inclusion perspective, that older workers should be included and not be discriminated against. So, as I said, the focus, because we were working with the Health and Safety Authority, the focus really was on health and on working conditions and potential barriers to working longer. So, what I'm going to just very briefly talk to you about first is around some of the stereotypes around older workers, and particularly around productivity, because I think that's important in the area that we're discussing at the moment around discrimination and people's perceptions. Then I'll say a little bit about the changing workforce and what that looks like, and then our findings around what factors make people more optimistic about working longer, and then who leaves early and why, and what policy lessons we might draw from that. So, one, I think, quite prevalent stereotype around older workers is that they're less productive. But actually, looking at the reviews of the evidence, that this is not something that is supported by the evidence. So, chronological age is not really a good determinant of performance or ability to work. Biological ageing, so the physiological aspects of ageing, they vary across individuals, of the same chronological age. And that is really influenced strongly by people's past working experiences in particular. So your current age and health, your biological age, is determined by the working conditions that you've been exposed to over your working life. Also, in terms of productivity, there are studies find that actually things like experience, knowledge, judgment, which can increase with age, can compensate for any physiological ageing. So that's at the individual level. Obviously, at the organisational level, there's also things that can be adjusted to take account of any biological ageing. So adjustments to tasks, to hours, and working conditions are important here. There's other aspects of people's work motivation, for instance, that are found to be much higher amongst older workers. Something like we were looking particularly at health and safety issues. Older workers are much less likely to have accidents. It's the youngest, the newest recruits that are more likely to be injured. Obviously, if you have an injury at a later stage, then it tends to have more serious consequences. But the evidence is clear; it's actually younger workers that are at greater risk of injury in the workplace. So, I suppose overriding this is also the idea that age is partially socially constructed, by stereotypes, as we've been talking about today, but also by policies. So this idea that, it's been set in stone for so long that 65 is the time to retire, that actually influences our perception of what it is to be old, or how capable you are of working at a particular age. So that is absolutely a social construction. In terms of the workforce itself, there's been really very significant changes over the last 30 years. So looking back to 1998, we had about 10% of the workforce were aged 55 and over, and this has gradually grown, as you can see. Well, I'd say gradual, but this is actually quite dramatic in terms of labour market change. So by 2022, most recent figures, 20% of the workforce are aged 55 and over. So that is a very big change. There's been quite a shrinking in the proportion that are in the 15 to 34 age group. And that's... I'll leave that. That's another story, but it is quite a striking change in terms of that portion there at the top. And you can also see I've put the numbers in there as well. So we're talking about 500,000 individuals aged 55 and over. So the numbers involved, because our workforce has been growing, those numbers have more than doubled in that period. Just to give you a sense of where people are working at an older age and what that looks like, the age profile, there's a few industries or sectors where older workers are more common. So agriculture, transportation and public administration. And you can see then the industries or sectors where there's a much smaller proportion are accommodation, information technology and finance are where it's. So there's issues, you can see just from that, there may be issues in these particular sectors around retaining older workers or attracting older workers. The agriculture, obviously, in some of these sectors, the self-employment is a really big determinant here, because people who are self-employed, and particularly farmers, are working till a much older age. So what working conditions? So as I say, our focus was on working conditions really, and make people more optimistic about working longer. So this is interesting, going back to our little survey right at the start, so maybe we can put this in as well. These results are from a European-wide survey that was carried out by the European Foundation. And it was, I'm going to just show you the figures for Ireland. And actually, the results for Ireland are more optimistic than many of the other countries. So people were asked, do you think you'll be able to work in your current job or a similar one until you're 60 years old? And if people were already aged over 55, they were asked about 5 years' time, so it was a slightly different question. So interestingly, some of the working conditions that came out as being really significant are whether people felt that their health and safety was at risk in their current job. So those people who said yes to that were half as likely to say that they could stay on in their current job, or a job like the one that they were doing. They weren't asked about their specific job. The other things that had a negative effect were physical demands. So this is a scale. So it was asking about different things about having to work in a tiring position, or having to do a lot of physical movement or whatever in their job. And it looks small on this, but it's because of the scale. So every 1 unit you went up in this scale, you're about 10% less likely to say that you would remain on or would be able to do the job at age 60 or over. Work-life balance also came out. So people who felt that they didn't have a good work-life balance currently, so remember this is all ages, were also less likely to have a perception that they could work longer. In terms of jobs, comparing people to our reference group was professional managerial workers. Those workers in elementary jobs, plant and machine operatives, craft workers and service workers, all less likely to have this perception of longevity in their job. Self-employment, as I mentioned, is one that works the opposite way. So the self-employed are more likely to see themselves working in that role longer. So moving then from perceptions, I suppose, to people's actual behaviour, and in the report we analysed then the labour force survey data, looking at whether people left their job when they were aged 55 to 59 years. So we're looking at what the reasons were for that, and where they. What occupations and industries they came from. So just looking at the reasons for going early, as I've defined it in this 55 to 59 age group, you can see that about half of the group say early retirement, so they're leaving due to retirement. But we still have this almost half, the other half, who are leaving for another variety of reasons. So so we have about 1 in 5 who are leaving because of involuntary job loss. So these refer to 2018. We have another 1 in 5 saying they've left at that age because of illness or disability, and then another 7% here saying for reasons of family care. So there's quite a lot of people who are leaving for reasons other than, we might think that the retirement is more likely to be a choice, although we can't really tell that completely from the data. There can possibly be a group in there who have been pushed out and didn't really want to retire, but we can't really tell that from the data here. So just looking at who is going for these different reasons and what groups this affects. So again, we're seeing these groups of workers compared to the managerial professional group, service workers, craft workers, agriculture workers, and those in plant operatives and elementary jobs. These are more production workers, all much more likely to have left due to illness or disability versus early retirement. Similarly, the same groups come up when we look at leaving because of job loss versus early retirement. So again, these occupations, people in these occupations are much more likely to have left employment early because they were pushed in this way, and it wasn't voluntary. And as was mentioned earlier, this has a much different impact on your well-being and health if you choose to leave employment versus if you're pushed. That has really got very significant differences in people's well-being. So finally, just looking at those who are leaving for family reasons, again we see the similar groups in terms of the occupational groups who are more likely to be leaving for family reasons versus early retirement. But we do see, as you might expect, a big gender difference here as well. So women were 5 times more likely to be leaving for family care reasons compared to men versus early retirement. So to summarise, and this is I suppose we are drawing here on some of the wider findings in the research as well. But one of our conclusions was really around so perceptions of ability to work in your current and a similar job, they're really strongly related to your working conditions, to what type of job that you're in, to your work-life balance and occupation, and the physical demands, as you might expect. That they're all strongly associated with perceived longevity. And we see that about half of the early exits that we're looking at in this period were involuntary or unplanned, I suppose, in a way. It may be higher than that, as I say, in some of the retirement groups. There may be others who wish to retire early. and who can't. But there was some interesting research done across Europe again that found that involuntary retirement, so going sooner than you want to go, is more common than involuntary work. So when they ask people what your preferred age of retirement is, more likely that more people say it was older than when they actually did retire or when they are exposed to retire. So I think that's interesting to keep in mind as well. So moving to just finally the implications. So I think policies to support retention, the things that really jumped out from the research are flexibility. So, part-time work, there's gradual retirement comes across in a lot of the studies. Care supports obviously are a key issue across the life cycle as well. So it's not just all about childcare, that actually care demands in later life are also really important, and prevention of health and safety risks are important. And these, I think, are important throughout the people's working life. So we don't get to 55 and go, oh, actually now we're going to make things okay and make sure conditions are all right for our employees. You need to be doing this across people's working life so that they can continue to work, and that biological ageing, as I say, is not happening to the same extent. Also, there are obviously lots of things that employers should be doing in terms of accommodating those who do need adjustments to their tasks or their working environments. Pensions and welfares I haven't touched on, so obviously the decision of when to retire or how long to keep working is very strongly related to people's financial position. But that was beyond the scope of this particular research piece. And I think, just to finish off on this, it's important that these myths and stereotypes about older workers are challenged, so that they don't become the discrimination, they don't influence employer decisions and organisational behaviours. So I shall finish there, and the full report is on our website, the SRI one, or the Health and Safety Authority website, if anyone wants to read it. Thank you very much.
I just wondered, did anybody have any comments to make or to add to what Helen had to say? I think it very much kind of contributes to the whole conversation that we've had here today. And I know it's been quite a long time for you sitting and listening, but I just want to say, and if it's all right with you, if you don't mind bearing with us just for a few moments, because we're going to end this conversation by actually just talking to you about some of the solutions. And I know when I spoke to you, Sam, there at the coffee, you were saying, what are the solutions? So Tanya and myself just really want to end with this report actually just looking at some of the solutions. Some of them have already been outlined. We promise we'll be very brief. And we promise that, unless you want to ask some questions afterwards, but if not, we're going to finally end with some light lunch at the end. But we do hope, our one comment is that we hope this won't be the end of this conversation, but that we will come together and we'll be able to have further conversations and maybe to be able to influence change. So without further ado, we'll just talk very briefly about what our solutions are.
Yeah, thank you so much, Trudy, and thank you to all the presenters today, Catherine, Mary, Helen, Jeanette, Niall. I think it becomes very clear that the work of this report builds upon your work, and I think that now I'm left with not much to say because you have said it all. But just maybe to summarize a little bit, of course, the report focuses mainly on the macro level and the meso level, so governmental level and organizational level. But what I really learned today, and also from my own engagement writing up the report, is that I had also my light bulb moment. And I realized the micro level is also important. We can all start addressing ageism by changing as well our own frame of mind. Stop seeing, for example, getting older or my birthday is coming up as something, why I'm getting again a year older. No, see it as a good glass of wine. The older, the better. And I try to implement this in my own life now, celebrating every year I'm getting older. And I think that's also kind of a butterfly effect. So if we share that. Coming back then to the macro level, we need, of course, to enhance the understanding and scope of healthy and active aging. That can be, of course, done through educational initiatives and also through strengthening the social security networks on a policy level. So, for example, what was interesting is looking at caregivers, particularly women struggling, taking care of their work and taking care maybe of their grandchildren, of spouses or other relatives. And if we can support them in through policy regulations, that could really help. Facilitating working life extensions. For example, offering people at the workplace opportunities where they can start volunteering or engaging in social activities before phasing out from their work life could help them to keep a new or building a new social network so that they don't enter, as we learned today from our example, fall into a hole where we say, okay, now I have no more work, what I do now? You build a new network from which you can then continue a happy life. Of course, that means that we need to increase awareness of anti-discrimination legislation towards a fair work environment for all individuals. So maybe stop thinking about stereotypes or trying to group us. Focus on the individual level. Who are we as individuals? What can we contribute individually? And needless to say, we need much more research. We need more research on what's the perception of ageism of older workers. We need to think about the cost and the benefits for older adults. You have elaborated a lot on the benefits for it, and I think that's really important. That's the kind of message that has to spread. Also, we need to understand more what are the influencing factors to make a decision to keep working or to say, I would like to retire. And as well, we need to always be conscious of the individual. What are our individual capacities? We are all different. As we age, we have different concerns, different needs, and these also need to be addressed. And what we need to do then, just to briefly summarize it, of course, the needs of the older workers need to be accommodated. We need to have support and encourage the older workers to be intrinsically motivated to keep working. And that means that they need to feel respected in the environment that they are in. They need to feel valued. How do we do it? I come to that in a moment. But that means, first and foremost, that we need to eliminate prejudice in the workplace. Moreover, we need to engage with older workers rather than removing them from the organization. So rather than seeing, they're coming to a certain age, it's almost like we're focusing on quantitative elements. Also, when we talk about recruitment, it seems like how many years of experience do we have? How long have we worked in a certain industry? So it's always a certain quantitative element. Maybe focusing more on the qualitative elements. What kind of values older people have? Not talking about experience, but what kind of skills and competencies people bring to the workplace could also help. So changing a little bit the mindset on what criteria we use to recruit people. And of course, promoting organization intergenerational oneness. Maybe having workshops where people interact with one another and create age-diverse friendships at the workplace. That can really foster as well an ethos or an organizational culture where ageism is not anymore a concern. And that means, of course, we need to eliminate age norming in recruitment, as we have discussed today extensively. Maybe to conclude with some practical tips for organizations more so than governmental levels. Phased retirement options are really important. Here we need to definitely offer engagement in social activities. When we talk about flexible work schedules, that also means that we really need to redesign HR policies on an organizational level. So even HR departments have to really reconsider how we can make a flexible work life. May it be hybrid work, may it be allowing people to maybe partially retire, phasing out slowly from the workplace, or even giving them the choice to remain in the workplace, which I think is also very important. Job crafting is a very interesting concept. That is the idea that HR stops trying to make people fit certain jobs and thinking it the other way around. So fitting jobs, people's skills. So the skills people have will be the basis to create certain jobs. Now, feedback is really important on the performance. It also is a key in HR to identify whether there's a need for training. I personally think training and ongoing development based on feedback is something that in our work life and in every life can only result in our improvement and betterment. And if we, for example, think about retirement or working in a higher age, maybe it's a good idea to establish some workshops where people at around 40, or even in my age with 37, engage in reflective activities to think about what I'm going to do in 30 years' time, where I do see myself. And I think that's much more a reflective task that we all have to engage within ourselves. So the physical environment, needless to say, becomes also an issue, especially when we think about health concerns that might be more evident when we are getting older. But we also need to think about the psychosocial working conditions. So accommodating, for example, again, caregiving obligation, giving people space, the same way as we give now mothers space to take care for their children at work. Maybe we also need to give space for older people to follow their caregiving duties. Most interestingly, in the literature, personally, I found is the ethical framework. And that's really establishing an organization culture that is based on respect and respecting the individuals, thinking about ways of how we can incentivize people to speak up when they are discriminated. Because I think that's the biggest problem. In any shape of discrimination is who speaks up when this happens, whether be it sexual harassment, be it ageism, any kind of discrimination is always an issue. I have experienced it, but do I actually speak up? Is it an environment where I feel safe to talk about this experience? And I think that's really what organizations need to create, this trustful environment where I feel respected and empowered enough to say, something happened to me here, we need to talk about that. And finally, perhaps one of the most interesting aspects is the intergenerational interaction. And I think here Trudy can say much more about that than I can. Thank you.
We're almost, this is our second last slide, so I know you'll be delighted to hear that. So we do, it has come up today time and time again. Ageism isn't just about older people in the workplace, but when we discriminate and when we leave out older people, we're leaving out their voice and their experience for younger workers. And if I could just be very practical, we did have an intergenerational learning programme in our university, and we conducted some research. It was a pilot study, and it was really interesting because we brought older and younger people together, and indeed Sinead was actually one of the elements was around what you talked about digital literacy skills. But when we asked the younger people what this meant for them, they said it was actually wonderful to hear the experience of the older people because it was that wider world experience. And they actually linked that with their stress levels, which really surprised me. And they said that in universities where actually our stress levels are building, but when you talk to these older people, it was actually on a Saturday morning. They said when you talk to them on a Saturday morning, they actually help you to realise there's a wider world perspective. So there's so much about tapping into the talents and the emotional intelligence of older workers and sharing that with the digital intelligence of younger workers. But I'd have to say it goes beyond that. It's not just about digital intelligence, it's not just about emotional intelligence. And one of the people that actually has been hugely involved in that is Chip Connolly, and we actually write about him in the study. And he actually came into Airbnb and talked about that value, that expertise, that sharing together. So that is something that we're promoting and that we actually is very strong within our report. It's actually about addressing ageism because it's of benefit for younger people as much as it is for older. And just Tanya, I think there was just one other slide, which was just to say to you that where we actually want to go with this research, and we'd love for every one of you in the room to be involved in this, is we want to create programmes, and I think it goes back to Sam was talking about that programmes within, primary school education, second level school education, further on, to actually look at the positive dimensions of ageing. And it's not saying it's not there, but I don't think we do enough of it. I think we value older people within our families, but going beyond into societal levels is actually what we need to do. We need more case studies. Marion, can I just say thank you very much. You actually introduced a case study today that really brought a richness, and I think we actually it'd be wonderful in another situation if we had more time to actually tap into that. But I think it's really important because it actually highlights to us how much we need to do in this area. And that the World Health Report did actually talk about more research, and that's where we want to go. I know I'm talking to many people in this room who are actually really interested in positive ageing, and it's that interdisciplinary perspective. So how we come to this from an interdisciplinary perspective. Awareness across generations. Again, I know we've talked about that. And then I think what's really important is moving away from the medical understanding of ageing. It goes back to Mary and the older person, the stick or the gnarled hands. And we're not saying that is a representation of older people, but it's one representation. So if we can bring that medical framing, I think you mentioned about the word the elderly, that kind of denotes a kind of sense of frailty as we age, but actually maybe more looking at a holistic, the positive dimensions of ageing. We've a lot more work to do on this, and as I say, we're not coming to you saying we have all the solutions. We know we've a long way to go, but it's actually, I think it's the collective conversation together. I'm guessing that you're really tired, and I think it's probably almost time for a coffee break. Just one final person that I want to thank, and without embarrassing her, and that's Trina is at the end of the room, Trina O'Hanlon. And the reason I'm actually saying hello to Trina, because Trina has just come in, is that when we actually went to talk about this research project, Trina was actually the research person that actually drove it forward. So I remember coming to Trina and saying, Trina, I have an idea. And then we worked together on this, actually developing this. And I do think this is what comes back to that this is very much about teamwork. It's not about any one person, it's about us together as teamwork, as a team trying to affect change. And I think at the end of the day, that's what we're looking at, is what area or who are the participants that we want to make a change for. And I think if collectively we can look at this as a team together, I think that's probably the most powerful part of this work. So I really want to thank you for coming today, but just before I end, is there any questions or any comments that you have before we go for lunch? Just to tell you, I have a fellow lecturer, and one of the things he does with the students is he gets them to stand up in the room and do some physical exercises, because he just says, that's what gets your brain thinking again. I promise I won't get you to do that, but I just want to thank you, and maybe we'll come back to this again some other time. In particular, I want to thank Neil and Sean for being here today. I want to thank Mary from Age and Opportunity, Conor and Catherine from William Fry, Sinead from the Irish Human Rights Equality Commission, Helen from the Economic Social Research Institute. I'm getting tired myself now trying to remember the names. And Tanya for coming today from Germany, and all of you who have participated, and I sincerely hope that we meet again. And last but not least, I do want to thank Adriana and Sarah, our conference team, who brought the whole conference together. So thanks a million to you. So thanks a million, and do enjoy the tea, coffee at the end. It'll be a chance to have a little chat together, and I look forward to seeing you again sometime. Thanks very much.